Should you always use one finger per fret? Well, in the beginning, I always recommend being as consistent as possible, but there are a number of common musical patterns that bass players play where breaking the one finger per fret rule is completely acceptable. For instance, one of the most common note patterns that bass players play is this. Now, if we applied one finger per fret, it would look like this. But you can see it's a little more movement and stretching, where using two fingers on the same fret is a little smoother and easier. The longer you play, the better you'll know when you can take it easy or when you need to work a little harder. Something tempting for beginners is to play with one finger across several strings when the notes are on the same fret. Now, that's a completely valid and useful technique, but try to not do it right now. Try to save that for later as kind of a last resort when things are too fast making that motion. So what you want to do now is move your finger all the way over to the next string. And you just want to develop a good strong habit of doing that, because doing this causes some limitations as to what you can do afterwards with that note. So later on we'll talk about things like sliding and bending and vibrato, and it's very hard to do those techniques with your finger flat against the strings that way. So you're better off with your fingertip most of the time. A common mistake I see beginners make is this. They stack two fingers to play one note. So you don't want to do this because you're wasting a finger, which you'll need, and you're delaying developing what little strength you're missing to be able to press the string down. So avoid stacking your fingers. One of the hardest things in the beginning is learning to keep your fingers close to the strings. So what everybody wants to do in the beginning, and it's just because you haven't developed the coordination yet, is that your fingers go flying off the string. Now, what you want is to learn to keep your fingers as close to the strings as possible. So they should just be hovering right above. Or they might even be just resting on that string. But again, I'm not pressing, I'm not using any pressure whatsoever when I play with this fourth finger. These fingers are just gently touching that string. So you can see I'm releasing the pressure. So I've released the pressure on this one as soon as I play this note. My finger's not going way off the string. So as you practice, you need to practice very slowly and deliberately, and keep asking yourself, are my fingers hovering? Are they close to the strings? A common mistake that beginners make is bending the strings when they're not supposed to. When you press down, you need to press straight back towards the fretboard. So it's tempting to pull the string closer to you, but what you're doing is you're changing the pitch. You're raising the pitch. So if you do that when you're not supposed to, you're going to sound out of tune. So press straight back, don't bend the strings. So a lot of that comes from where you place your thumb and the angle at which you hold your bass. It shouldn't hurt to play the bass, but in the first few weeks you might find a few things uncomfortable, so you can expect your fingertips to be a little bit sore until you develop some calluses. And then you might find your forearm is a little bit sore just because you've never really done anything like this with your hands. But that should not last. So if you feel any sort of intense pain, you should stop what you're doing, go seek some medical advice, go take some private lessons with somebody and see what you might be doing wrong. But most pain comes from pressing too hard. So follow my advice and press as lightly as possible right behind the frets. A lot of my students ask if they should use hand exercisers. Well, maybe. I'm always scared to recommend them because I think you can do just as much harm to yourself as good. You could injure yourself or overdo it. So if you think about it, we're not trying to develop strength. It doesn't take much strength at all to press the strings or pluck the strings. What it requires is musical coordination, and that just comes from hours and hours of practice. So I recommend if your bass is around, just play your bass and you'll develop all of the strength that you need. If your bass seems unusually hard to play, maybe the strings are really high off the fretboard or just seems really hard to press the strings, then what you should do is go to a music store and play a number of other basses just for comparison. And now if all of those basses seem like they're just as hard to play, then it's probably just you and you need to practice more. But if your bass seems way more difficult to play than all of those other basses, what you need to do is take your bass to a guitar repair place and ask them to do a setup. Or you could take it to the music store where you bought it. Now, once it's set up, it should be much easier to play. Now, a second thing that you could do is buy lighter gauge strings that are a little bit easier to press down. This is another lesson that has a lot of fine details. So come back to this video and rewatch it every once in a while just to see what you might have forgotten or missed. And if you're a beginner, the big thing to focus on right now is pressing as lightly as possible right behind the fret. And just remember, you're trying to touch the string to the fret, no more. And then after that, just try to work on muting the strings with that first finger. Now, it takes a little while to get that going, but it'll happen. So there are a number of exercises on StudyBass that you can do to work on your fretting, and you should work on them slowly and every day.